Now, I mean, you were talking about those processes. I was actually trying to draw a line of thought from, the processes that ought to have taken place. And then, okay, maybe it didn't take place for whatever reason, and then it finally gets to the presidency, let's say sometime in September. And, as you rightly pointed out, you would think that the parties involved would have been called, but what we got was that a query was issued to the NNPC, which they say they replied, and that they thought it was all well and good with the world. You don't know if, the CBN was intimated as to, what the NNPC had said on in its own particular letter to the president. And so we have all this, it would seem, disconnect, and it's not until this came into public limelight. I mean, by this time in December, when this letter finally came out to the public, one would think that what you would get from the CBN is that, well, we did raise this letter sometime in September, but our fears have been allayed. I mean, one should have heard from the CBN saying that this matter has been laid to rest. There has been clarification and really no money is missing, or that, whatever the money was, we know the whereabouts of the money and we will get it immediately. Instead, what we got from the CBN was them saying that they were not going to join issues. What does that do for us?
We can situate, I concede with your line of thought, but we can then reduce the whole conversation to a communications problem. But that's not the problem. We have a deeper problem. The deeper problem is that the CBN spotted certain things. If you look at it against the context in which this was being raised, we were dealing with lifting of crude oil problems. We were dealing with the NNPC itself, the Minister of Finance, and everybody was talking about the fact that we have this oil theft and we had issues. So if you look at the subtext within which this was discussed, that can create in the minds of people this suspicion, or naturally you say they are put on inquiry immediately. And as such, they would then be worried that what's happening, we didn't see this money, we didn't understand it. But then there are two issues that come out here. If the Central Bank of Nigeria does not therefore understand the way and manner in which the NNPC is structuring its businesses enough to understand what it is expecting in the Federation account, or how those monies get back to it, and that's a key issue Nigerians should be interested in knowing.
So how do we get that issue? Because this discrepancy in figures between the major revenue earners is not something that started today. It's been there for years and years, and we keep talking about it.
It's a discrepancy more in processes and understanding of how affairs are conducted. If the way NNPC conducts its business is different from how the CBN understands it, that is the key issue we should focus on, rather than the drama behind it.
Now, let's also focus on the reconciliation meeting. It's taken them 48 hours. I mean, 2 days of constant meetings. The first one lasted for at least 6 hours to reconcile these issues. And then we understood that the meeting continued the following day. Yesterday, they came out, the coordinating minister of the economy had this to say. She says that I just want to say that this reconciliation is still an ongoing matter. But we thought at this point in time, after working till last night, we should share with you some of our thoughts and clarifications on the issue. She says what we have done so far shows that $49.8 billion, and that's the first point we want to make. There are some perhaps misconceptions or misunderstandings that led to this figure, and we'll be able to come to the conclusion that we can account for this amount. Now, what I'm trying to point out here is the fact that she says that this reconciliation is still an ongoing matter. It does raise questions, doesn't it, for you?
Not really. See, look, every day agencies have to reconcile activities within themselves. If you look at if you've ever worked in any major agency or understand how they work, and that's why we call it civil service. It goes through so much paperwork, so much, and so sometimes they normally do have reconciliation meetings. You would expect that normally the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance are always verifying their figures most of the time with each other. You remember the last time we had a discussion around the budget here? When I said to you that you can get figures, sometimes we rely on the World Bank figures, rather than, because you get one separate one from Ministry of Finance, one from the Budget Office, one from the Central Bank. It's been an ongoing issue in the whole country. That's way back like the last, as I can remember, way back from our...
Which was also something that came out during the subsidy probe. I don't know if you
Exactly.
If you
We're
remember.
you saw what went on, they went back to reconcile figures. There's some, I've asked, let us focus on the major issue. The constant issue is that, are there no regular exchanges where we can just exchange figures? Because you will find this whole problem always coming up every now and then. What the CBN, as an institution, because sometimes I think we focus on the individual, did was that their understanding of the whole thing, within the fact that oil theft was predominant, there were issues, they would naturally say, do I want to trust this NNPC? Are you following me? And then they go ahead to the president. That is not to excuse the processes and the practices based on what we know publicly.
You know, I like the way you put it, because you also publish works, so that's why even here on Channel Television we'll be very careful not to actually personalize it. We're talking about the CBN, not the head of the CBN. We're talking about the NNPC and not the head of the NNPC.
Correct.
But if this hadn't actually come to the public, perhaps we would have actually been piling this up and up with different figures. Now we're trying to look at how we can actually get, reliable figures, data as to what is happening economically, especially because it's the same thing. Sometimes we go on and we talk about 150 million strong Nigerians. In another place you see 180, 174. We don't even know how many we are. So we don't even know how much is going and how much is unremitted. So how has this now finally been resolved with all of these agencies and parastatals coming together? Have they finally been able to say this is the way to go when we need any figure? Just a click, we'll be able to get it?
That goes to the point what Marquez was making. We run a system whereby we move around crisis, where we prompt ourselves only on crisis. You said it, the letter was there September. The parties are known. But when the crisis came up, we moved, we resolved it. Take your mind back to the issue about the fuel subsidy. We didn't reconcile it until the crisis came up. If you look at over time, whenever we reconcile things, it's because
there's a crisis.
And the crisis is engineered. But that is what I'm saying, that we should go back and understand that we should be grateful for this problem coming out, rather than pick sides or choose whatever. It helps us to understand that governments do not reconcile, because I'm asking myself, if you're going to be running the country and yet your central bank does not have a clear idea of the revenue that's available to it, or what is available in the Federal Board of Inland Revenue or in DPR, what figures are you using to plan?
That's the question.
Therefore, you are using estimates? Okay, fine. Let's just assume that the reconciliation has taken place and say the money is in Federal Board of Inland Revenue. Whose account? How come the CBN doesn't know? If the money is with DPR, how did it get there? How come it's not with the CBN? How come the CBN does not know? If the reply was given, sent to the presidency, and then this particular reply explaining the money was actually sent back to the CBN, and they still do not agree, then they'll continue discussion.
Because from your analysis, what I'm saying is that the CBN should have
there's only one list of the government.
Of the inflows and outflows. So they know where it's coming from and they know where it's going out.
Let's not complicate it. The oil business is a bit more complicated. But it's as simple as anything. You do joint venture. Who owns the NNPC government? So they do contracts, they live for others. And so you know the structured finance. Money goes to DPR, money goes to inland revenue, tax on whatever. When they lift on behalf of others, it comes to you. When they lift domestic crude oil, money comes back. Who is the purser to the government?